Dead Rising 2 was announced on February 9th, 2009, and despite the warm reception, there were seemingly a couple big red flags. One, that the game was handed to a developer in Vancouver that had only worked on nothing but baseball games prior, and two, that the game had a different protagonist after the first Dead Rising left off on a bit of a cliffhanger. So, did this actually hinder things? Again, let's take it from the top. Dead Rising 2 takes place 5 years after the first game in a town called Fortune City. Our new protagonist, Chuck Green, is a former motocross star, currently participating in a sports game show called Terror is Reality. After his appearance on the show, the zombies used for the program get released, with Chuck being framed for the incident. He then has 72 hours to scavenge for his daughter, prove his innocence, and find out why he was even framed in the first place before the military shows up. So right off the bat you can tell there's a lot different already. Let's start with Chuck. So if the first game had Frank West progressively learning to be selfless and to try and help others, Dead Rising 2 has Chuck Green already being the selfless one. He's a widowed husband, a loving father, and is already open to helping people. So, in a way, Chuck can be seen as a bit boring as there's not much to his character, and not much for him to overcome internally, just the zombie epidemic in front of him. I mean, you could argue that he still hasn't gotten over his wife's death, but the script certainly makes it seem like he's been ready to start macking on bitches.
Just checking out the view.
Looks like he's gotten over it to me. And although Chuck understands just how serious and dangerous the situations he faces are, he often spouts dad joke-esque one-liners, which might be a bit contradictory to his character in a way, but I think it's the dev's way of showing he has a strong sense of justice or something? I'm not sure.
I saw what you did there.
Regardless, I still think it fits him. Makes him have at least some character. Another difference as we move into gameplay is, since Chuck was a motocross racer, obviously the photography element of the first game is completely gone. What replaces this is the innovation of combo weapons. Take two items and duct tape them into an even deadlier weapon. Easy as that. By doing so, using a combo weapon will earn you twice the amount of points as that of the use of a normal weapon. Such weapons include a sledgehammer fire axe combo, boxing gloves and a bowie knife for some makeshift Wolverine claws, and a pitchfork taped to his shotgun. With all these new fancy combo weapons, that also means you're going to need things to use them on. As you'd expect, aside from the zombies, the psychopath boss fights return, with even crazier yet also not as memorable people. Such bosses include a children's store mascot with a flamethrower, Jack Black, a postman, a ninja protester, and some asshole from the beginning of the game that has a massive hate boner for Chuck. A common thing I noticed this time around is that less psychos are ranged focused. Some have ranged attacks, yes, but for the most part they're a lot more aggressive and are mainly close quarter focused. So you're not going to be getting many fights like all of Carlito's fights or Cletus's fight from the first game. Whether or not this is a good thing, I'll leave to you, as I personally don't mind the change all that much. Oh, and for the first time ever, the game also has drop-in, drop-out co-op. So if you ever need help with a boss fight or just feel like killing zombies with a friend, you can. It's a lot of fun. Moving forward, we're also given a reintroduction to vehicles. More specifically, you can add things to a motorbike which you can unlock. Although you have less options in comparison, it's a feature which can be useful for grinding. Speaking of which, the system is back alongside actual money being a thing. I mean, it wouldn't be not Las Vegas without gambling. So now there's gambling minigames and slot machines that you can win money from to put towards new shops set up by looters, in which you can buy weapons, keys for those vehicles that I mentioned earlier, or even Zombrex for Chuck's daughter Katie. It's an unexpected addition, and while kinda cool, it mostly serves as just being the main option to get Zombrex outside of scouting for it. Certain aspects of gameplay have also been improved. You can now move around while aiming a gun, survivors are more willing to defend themselves, making things much less tedious. So much so that they're actually kinda handy for distracting certain bosses. Oh, and Stacy, your new friend, doesn't call you every second like Otis did, so that's a very welcome addition. The game's new area of Fortune City is twice as large as Willamette, and according to the developers, it houses up to 7,000 zombies on screen at once, compared to the mere 800 of the first game. And with the larger environment, the game has even more of the first game's little secret hiding spots for useful items and weapons, still making you feel that much more rewarded for having a bit of keen perception. Although the story this time around isn't as interesting when it's following Chuck, you still find out about things that happened after the first game. Frank West and Isabella Keyes are mentioned, and Zombrex is essentially a mass-produced version of the vaccine that Isabella gave Frank in the first game. So things do connect eventually, and when they do, it's cool to see and or hear. The main story, however, is, as said, less spectacular. Let's start with the characters. Although Chuck is a likable protagonist, he's also not the most interesting. As said previously, he's pretty much just got one characteristic. He's a father. He takes care of his daughter, tends to help out others, and makes dad jokes whenever someone tries to kill him. Fine enough for me, I guess, but he could still be a lot better. Everyone around Chuck, though, is just as one-dimensional. Stacy, an activist, is someone who is very protective when it comes to Chuck, his daughter, or even when it came to the zombies originally. Sullivan, the security guard, is meant to seem shady and untrustworthy, yet you're never really given a true reason as to why. He's just kind of a dickhole for no reason. And Rebecca is just Frank West if he hadn't learned anything from the first game. She's just obsessed with being the first one to tell a giant story. So, in the end, I'd say characters are a bit more weak this time around. Now, when you get down to it, the big part of the mystery doesn't really kick in until the very tail end of the game, as it pulls the switcheroo with TK, the host of the game show that Chuck was on, being billed as the big bad guy, when in actuality, the guy was only a pawn. Whoop-de-doo. Instead, the real villain is Sullivan. Turns out he's an agent for Phenotrans, the company that makes Zombrex. As far as I know, there's no real hint that he worked for them, he just kinda does now. Not really sure what was in it for him, as even he said it wasn't about the money, but whatever. The reasoning behind why Sullivan caused the second outbreak would make sense in theory, but in the first game it was explained that the zombies were caused by genetically modified killer queen bees originally created by the government to help stop a beef shortage. So, if these queen bees are required for the Zombrex vaccine, either 1, due to the genetic modification, can't they just reproduce more eggs over time on their own? Or, if not, then can't Phenotrans just ask the government to help them make more out of the ones they have if it was originally a government project to begin with? Do you really need zombies to house and harvest them? Doesn't make sense. To end this section, Dead Rising 2 managed to bring a number of improvements and a couple bits of innovation to the franchise. Granted, it didn't carry over absolutely everywhere. While the story this time around might have been a bit less gripping, and some of the characters might have been forgettable, I think I can forgive that. The game is still just as fun as the first, with the added benefit of combo weapons, as well as a bit more focus on vehicles. Even though it feels as if KG had less creative input on the game, I still feel like Blue Castle were surprisingly able to match the feel of the gameplay and the mostly serious, yet occasionally humorous tone and spirit of Dead Rising reasonably well. It pretty much feels like what it is, the first game if it were 50% more westernized, and honestly, it wasn't as bad as it sounded. It was a worthy entry to kick off what would now be a big franchise for Capcom. Afterwards, the question then became, what would they do next? Is it even possible to outdo themselves?
Thanks for the coffee.